So when you were looking at all these different options, you mentioned emotive, Muse, at what point did you decide, hey, this is the device I want to jump in on for this project? And
Yep.
how were you able to make that decision as a researcher?
Once I made this decision, we're going to go after this small business innovation research funding, with NeuroType as being the small business. I said, well, I got to find a mobile EEG headset. Towards this date here, you see this big discrepancy between what the person thinks their craving level's at and what their brain reactivity level is at.
It's a question I get asked on YouTube all the time. Which device would be best for your research? Whether that's a personal project that you're doing at home for self-development, all the way up to government-funded or privately funded neuroscience research initiatives that are pushing the boundaries of what we know in technology and science. I've got the real deal for you here today, Dr. Scott Burwell, who is a neuroscientist and funded by the National Institute of Health to do opioid use disorder research with mobile EEG headsets. I couldn't think of someone more knowledgeable to bring on the channel, and I, Dr. Rall, your medical doctor confidant, hope you enjoy the content that's coming up. I had all kinds of questions for Dr. Burwell. Mainly, I wanted to hear his ability to weigh pros and cons of different mobile EEG devices for his research specifically, what brain markers they were looking for opioid use disorder to help patients clinically, how they make that decision process of what headsets to use, how to obtain funding from the government to do this groundbreaking research, and how you, the audience, can get involved in his research or a project that's very similar. Hope you enjoy. All right, so I've got Dr. Scott Burwell with me today, neuroscientist, founder of NeuroType. Scott, thanks so much for joining me today. I'm really excited to talk about your research.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Cody, for having me here.
And so can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you came to be founding a company that's using mobile EEG to look at drug addiction issues?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I have about 13 years experience in EEG and other psychophysiology measurements and functional MRI. I got my PhD at the University of Minnesota at the Center for Twin and Family Research, where in the 1980s they studied, they found twins that were reared apart. You might have heard about it in your psychology textbooks, where they found these identical twins reared apart. They're both named Bob. They're both firefighters. They both have wives named Brenda. But the research that I did in my PhD was really focused on trying to understand the genetic and environmental influences on the development of addiction and the brain dysfunctions that go along with that. Does abusing alcohol or drugs change your brain physiology, or is your brain physiology changed because of a genetic predisposition? And so, that was the focus of my PhD research. Shortly after, I did my postdoc in the psychiatry department at the University of Minnesota as well, just across the river. And I met Justin Anker, who is a co-founder and collaborator on this research project that we're doing with the Neurosity devices. But our focus, our research collaboration was really focused on, sort of how stress physiology changes as a process of recovery from alcohol use disorder, and using laboratory-based physiology measures to assess that. And I discovered that some of these physiology measures that we're doing there, some of the physiology measures that they found to correlate with addictions, are really not that difficult to study using mobile-based sensors. And so in roughly 2019 or so, I attended a course or a workshop at Yale University called Innovation to Impact, and proposed an idea that I had regarding using more mobile EEGs to track brain responses to drugs and alcohol, among other stimuli, and track those over the course of recovery to sort of give clinicians a window inside to the brain to say, is treatment working or is treatment not working? And if it's not working, how do we change that? What do we target in terms of our therapies.
Yeah, and you've been through the gambit of using EEG in the laboratory. You were telling me earlier that you actually spent some time even in San Diego, where they have the infamous EEG lab.
Yeah.
Off of MATLAB. So when you take a look at what has been done with EEG in the past and what opportunities that mobile EEG offers now, how do you think about that? How do you even approach that as a researcher, and what advantages are there to mobile EEG?
Yeah, so I guess I'll start with the laboratory-based EEG. So I learned on a 128 sensor net, which is 128 channels that even come down onto your face. I also used during graduate school a 64 channel, essentially a swim cap, and those things are really good at getting really accurate measurements of electrophysiology coming from the brain. They use conductive gels that you sort of use to make the contacts between the sensors and the scalp, and that all of your connections are getting a really good contact before you begin your measurements and make any inferences about what's happening in the brain. The downside to that is that they're stationary. They usually have to be done in a laboratory, and as well as it takes anywhere from 20, 30. I have a friend that it would take for 128 channels, it would take 45 minutes to set somebody up, even before you record 1 minute of brain activity. And with using these portable devices, we can be starting place the cap on the head, record, and be done in 10, 15 minutes. Whereas, in another traditional setting, it would take, we'd still be just setting things up. So, as far as clinical practice goes, I think that for a lot of indications like common behavioral disorders, psychiatry, other psychological disorders and stuff like that, the portable sensing devices have this advantage that they can be done really quickly outside of the laboratory. And now we're kind of at this critical period where I think the mobile sensing devices are good enough to do the kind of recordings that we're interested in.
And what are the kind of recordings that you're interested in? I know that NeuroType uses some software and presents images, but if you could go into more depth and what you're looking for in the neurosignatures, I think people would be really interested in that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'll rewind a little bit back to that Yale Innovation to Impact course, where it was sponsored by the National Institute on Drug Abuse, and it was really geared at trying to find researchers who wanted to translate, research findings outside of a laboratory into a real world, make positive impact sort of scenario. And at that time, I proposed an idea that's been, a really common finding in addiction neuroscience for 10, 20 years or so, which is the brain responses that an individual with a substance use disorder has to pictures of drugs, or if it's an opioid use disorder, if a person sees a picture of opioids interspersed with a picture of puppy dogs, chocolate cake, and office supplies, pens, and staplers, their person with opioid use disorder will have a brain response to the opioid pictures that looks much more like the chocolate cake pictures than it does to the office supplies. And for a person without an opioid use disorder, it goes the opposite way. So, your brain response to office supplies and opioid pictures is about the same. And so I presented this to these individuals at the Yale Innovation Impact course, and the two program officers that were in attendance from the NIDA small business innovation research group were there, and they thought it was a really cool idea. And they encouraged me to apply for a small business innovation research award. We eventually got it. And, you know, I really think that this focus on event-related potentials has a lot of potential, for lack of a better word, in clinical work, because they're so well understood, or they're so well studied. There's a lot of clinical correlations between event-related potentials and psychological disorders. And you know, it's exactly the sort of thing that you can record using a portable EEG device that has to be that's subject to a lot more noise, I guess, you know, from the environment, from you know, body physiology, other sorts of what we call artifacts in the field.
What's exciting to me is to see the government, you know, National Institute of Health, NIDA, being government organizations, sort of giving the stamp of approval by giving you money to do this type of project. And I wanted to ask you, because I haven't seen, you know, I'm not deep into the research field as you know, MD instead of PhD, but have you seen very many projects that have been approved like this? And what's the appetite from the government in these types of mobile EEG research projects from your perspective?
Yeah, so I think the appetite is growing. You know, you see a lot more stuff that's sponsored by the National Institutes of Health, focused on new med tech devices, and especially even the word neurotechnology is starting to crop up in NIH funding announcements and stuff like that, where I don't think it was even 3 years ago or something. Right. As far as, you know, the research that's been conducted using these portable devices, you know, I think you've had Olav Krigolson on here before. You know, they're at University of Victoria. There's, you know, other people that have used like the Emotive system or Open BCI systems, as well as other Muse systems that have been published, but I'm not quite sure that they've been funded by NIH money or by government funding.
Yeah, I think Dr. Krigolson's perhaps is from some Canadian funds.
Gotcha.
But so when you were looking at all these different options, you know, you mentioned Emotive, Muse. At some point, you decided to take the jump on the Neurosity. And actually, Alex Castillo and I were talking about you specifically, and he said that you've been with them sort of from the beginning, just kind of communicating like, well, what are the capabilities, you know? So, you know, through Notion 1 to the Crown now, you know, at what point did you decide, hey, this is the device I want to jump in on for this project? And how were you able to make that decision as a researcher?
Yeah, so I mean, it was a nerve-wracking first step, I could say that. You know, once I made this decision, we're going to go after this small business innovation research funding, with NeuroType as being the small business. I said, well, I got to find a mobile EEG headset, and you know, so right away I bought one of the Muse headsets. And I also bought an Open BCI 16-channel headset that I got, you know, as part of some seed funding that I got from Yale and NIDA. And you know, I really enjoyed using those because, you know, the Muse headset, it's like you just pop it on, it goes over your forehead. It doesn't require you to have your hair in a certain way. I mean, I don't have to worry about that all that much, but you know. But, you know, for a lot of people, your hair can cause issues with EEG recording. And the Open BCI, you know, has 17 or 16 channels. And, but the downside to the open BCI headset is it's not as production level and easily translatable across different head sizes, different people, than something like the Neurosity device. And so, I had started just writing just kind of mass questions to the Neurotech X listserv that is kind of a community of neurotechnology enthusiasts, I suppose you could say, and asking, what are people's recommendations? And AJ Keller just kind of reached out to me and said, hey, myself and Alex are starting a company, and we're going to have this device, and I think it might suit your needs. So we hopped on a call, and even after that call, though, it took me a while to sort of make that final that leap. But the Neurosity devices have, from the start, even since the first developer kit 1, have been production grade, meaning out of the box. You turn it on, set it on your head, and it's ready to go pretty much. As long as you kind of position it in the right way. And so that was a major selling point, because I could also see that being a useful form factor for clinical use. And then also the use of the 8 channels. So this is a little known fact, and I don't even know if it's going to serve us, but the American Neurological Association, covers what constitutes for coverage for an EEG is a minimum of 8 channels. And so, in the back of my mind, I kind of kept that relevant. And that's why we chose against the Neurosity device over, say, a Muse headset, which has only 4 channels. And then finally, and this is actually a really important factor, is the positioning of the sensors relative to the reference and common mode sensors. So the common mode sensor subtracts out the electricity that runs through the walls of your house, up through the floor, through your feet, and hits the sensor and can swamp out, even though you don't feel electricity coursing through your body, it can swamp out the tiny, tiny electrical signals that are measurable at the head. And so the common mode sensors they're right here on the right side of your head. And then they have a reference sensor too that's on the left side of your head, and that subtracts out all your, a lot of the leftover noise that's in your body, your heart rate and stuff like that. And so the relative positioning of those is fairly common to where we record references in a laboratory setting, which is either on the earlobes or on the mastoids, the bony part on the back of your head, and relative to the rest of the sensors, which are roughly on the top of the head. That was sufficiently, the positions were sort of sufficiently far apart from one another that it made me happy for lack of a.
And once you get the device, is there a process that you go through to sort of validate the EEG signal for yourself to make sure that, like, hey, this thing is working, it's getting good data, and this is something we can actually use in the project?
Yeah, one of the advantages of using event-related potentials is that what's required is, so it's a brain response, it's a brain electrical response to a stimulus, such as a picture on a screen or a sound in your ear. And if you're recording that brain signal, if you're recording that event-related potential, that ERP, and you're doing it well, it's there, you can see it. And if you're not doing it, it's a flat line. So, when I was able to record that was an advantage. And then also, does it correlate with the properties of the stimulus? So, does it correlate with the pictures of chocolate cake and, puppy dogs versus, office supplies and, bored people or something like that? Does it correlate in known ways? And so it did. So that sort of met our second criteria, check the second box. So that's how I make that decision.
Yeah, very exciting. And so let's talk about more about NeuroType itself. Is this going to be, I could, you're already doing research with it, but is this going to be a platform that's going to be used clinically? And if so, how would that be used clinically with people that have opioid use disorders?
Yep. Yeah. So right now, we are going after opioid use disorder is a sort of first step. And, currently, for those that aren't really familiar with the substance use disorder clinic or treatment space, the field looks fairly similar now as it may have 20 years ago, with the exception of some new medications and some changes in the general beliefs and things about substance use disorder. Still, a clinical interaction is an interview, maybe with some self-report measures, and maybe questionnaires and stuff like that are really subject to a lot of sort of fuzziness and just generally potential bias that can happen. So a clinician may perceive the symptoms that somebody's reporting totally different than the way another clinician might perceive it. And so this leads to a lot of fuzziness around how clinics, around how patients sort of interact with clinicians and maybe how clinicians interact with patients. And so our focus is to make substance use disorder treatment look a little bit more like the rest of medicine, where doctors make decisions based on, in part based on biometric data. You might get a blood pressure reading, or you might, go order up an EKG or something like that. And so what we're focusing on with opioid use disorder is tracking how people's brains respond to these pictures of opioid cues over the course of treatment to sort of get an objective measure of craving, or what people in addiction neuroscience call motivated attention. So how much the attractiveness of a cue sort of makes you want to attend to that cue even more, meaning how much the attractiveness of, a pill bottle makes you want to, an opioid pill bottle makes you want to attend to that cue. And we can measure that using brain potentials, event-related potentials, in a clinic. And so that's what we're focusing on right now with our Small Business Innovation Research Project from NIDA. And we are doing this in a group of opioid use disorder patients at University of Minnesota. And we're setting up for sort of our phase 2 project as well, where we're interacting with the FDA, trying to understand what their expectations are for future clearance, plus, what might need to be in order for insurance companies to cover this sort of thing, which is a whole new set of hurdles. But regulated, and you could probably attest to this, regulated medical devices tend to be more likely to be covered, as well as covered devices tend to be used more often by physicians. And so this is, a step that we feel is valuable to go after, especially at this early stage, where we're still kind of culling the important data that we need to.
Yeah, every aspect of this is interesting to me. It's like the pathway to, FDA approval, getting it into the hands of providers, the actual clinical use, because I've done substance abuse treatment as a psychiatrist myself. And when you're talking to a patient and they're trying to explain to you cravings or other aspects of their use disorder, it's hard to understand what exactly they're talking about. So, some objective measures would be really helpful.
Yeah. And I can show you.
Yeah. Did you have some slides too? That's exactly what I was about to ask you.
I can show you kind of a digital report that one of the digital reports we're working on. I need to get access here, but one of the digital reports that we're working on as part of the process, and we're showing this to clinicians as a as a way to try to understand, what parts of the report are valuable to clinicians, what they would want out of it. We're interacting with a lot of clinicians at kind of the whole scope of different kinds of treatment clinics. I think I need permission here.
Did that work?
Let me try. Oh yeah, there we go. All right, are you seeing this?
Yeah, got it.
All right, so yeah, this is for one of the patients in our current ongoing project. We don't have that many patients yet, but we are well underway into data collection, and the support we have from the psychiatry department has been really great at the University of Minnesota. This is sort of like what somebody might see, a clinician that has just run a participant or a patient through this viewing of pictures. Of some of those pictures have drugs and alcohol. Some of those pictures have images that are not related to drug and alcohol and might be pleasantly reinforcing, like puppy dogs and chocolate cake and such. And so on the left side here in this pane, we have a patient ID. Everything's been de-identified. The dates have also been sort of scrambled, so to maintain some patient confidentiality here. These are the substances that this particular patient uses a lot, and this is the route of administration. So they tend to smoke. This person probably smoke heroin, smoke cannabis, smoke stimulants, and often. And it's really common in the sample that we're using for people to be smoking methamphetamine. On the right side here, we have the patient's sort of treatment start date here, and we have the patient's treatment end date. We have just some indicators of recent changes in sort of their self-reported craving. So how much did their craving, their own awareness of craving change over time, as well as their brain reactivity, and also the discrepancy between their brain reactivity and their self-reported awareness craving. So, there's the way that somebody feels, and then there's the way that somebody's brain reports them feeling. And we have that data again, sort of displayed down here. This is their immediate craving and sort of this orange hue. This is their brain reactivity to opioid cues in the magenta. And there's sort of this loose correlation over time. They were assessed on this date, this date, this date, this date, this date, and this date. And there's sort of, early on especially, there's this correlation in how the person's brain is responding. I'll talk about these spikes at this time point as well as this time point, but we can just jump into the first time point and see which images the person's brain responded to. Again, this is all just a bunch of cryptic information to also hide more patient information. But, if I scroll down to the bottom here, we have a bunch of these image tags. These image tags are assigned to each image based on the content that's in the image. And that's based on computer vision, identifying objects in the image. So the green bars reflect cues that are not related to substances, and the purple hue tags refer to substance-related tags. And so right off the bat, you could see that there's a lot of purplish bars towards the top here, and not that many towards the bottom. And those purplish cards indicate that they're paying more motivated attention to these drug-related cues towards the top. And we could go into each one of these cues and we could say, okay, well, the top drug-related cue is smoke. And remember, this person smokes opioids, they smoke stimulants. And these are the pictures that are most often linked to that big brain response. So these types of pictures are highly evocative for this individual. Also, there's pictures of crystal meth, There's some alcohol pictures, which this person doesn't necessarily report, but again, these pictures are the ones that the person's brain is responding to more than we can say. So these are the non-substance related cues, and we can scroll down here and we can find, let's say happy. And so they didn't respond to pictures of happy all that highly, but here's the pictures that their brain responses were much less strong to. And we can jump back into, all the rest of the sessions and look, so they're fairly closely linked across these early dates, but towards this date here, you see this big discrepancy between what the person thinks their craving level's at and what their brain reactivity level is at. And it just so happens that this time point here is just before the person leaves an inpatient treatment clinic, meaning that they are about to go from 28 days in a protected sobriety focused situation, kind of back out into the wild, and have to, face a lot of the stressors and a lot of the, cues that might lead them to potentially relapse or potentially, just use again. And so we can also, dig back into this, into the cues that are evocative for this. And so a clinician might use that information and say, okay, well, let's unpack that a little bit. Your brain is reacting to pictures of these opioid related cues, a lot of pills, and stuff, and these pictures. And we can ask that patient, what is it about these? How can we maybe change your thinking around it? How can we maybe change your treatment plan? Maybe keep you here for another week or so, just to make sure that you're feeling comfortable before you go on. And so that's, that's this one patient. There's other patients that exhibit different patterns. So we'll just go to the most recent one where their brain reactivity and their awareness of their craving is so far off from one another that this could be a treatment focus in itself. How do you identify what your body is reacting to substance use pictures versus how you perceive your own cravings? And so that's kind of, another way that a clinician might focus their therapies on this. So we're still seeking. So, if any watchers out there are addiction medicine professionals, whether you be an MD, a counselor, a PhD, a master's degree, professional degree person, love to talk to you, if you want to reach out to me about this, because we're trying to really understand the utility of this in a clinic and how this could be beneficial to you.
Yeah. Thanks for showing us that.
Absolutely.
I've never, just so the audience knows, I've never seen those screens before, and you hit the nail on the head exactly what I was complaining about, which was like, when I have talked to patients about their cravings before, it's hard to understand, like, well, is this like a physiological craving or is this like a mental craving? Yeah. And how much does that correspond to where their body is at? Yeah,
exactly. And that's one of the things we've heard. We talked to, tens and maybe more than 100 clinicians so far. And that's one thing that everyone kind of hampers on, is that the people have a hard time recognizing their own physiology, which we're hoping to help them recognize, and maybe that will help them sort of stay engaged with treatments and stuff.
Yeah. And I appreciate you, offering, people from the audience that want to reach out and get involved,
yes,
to reach out to you. What's the best way for people to reach you?
Yeah. So our website is, our website is www.neurotype.io. Otherwise, feel free to email me, scott@neurotype.io.
Great. And what's in store for you and NeuroType over the next couple of months? I know you're right in the middle of doing this study. Busy.
We are setting up for this phase 2 SBIR project. We're talking to the FDA in about 3 weeks here, and so hopefully that goes really well. I'm just excited to kind of get in the room with them and talk about this stuff. And then we're also interacting with some clinicians, some at the University of Minnesota, some at other places that are potentially thinking about integrating this with therapies that are really designed at helping people cope with the cues that they find triggering for their substance use disorder. So, one of our collaborators, Hamed Akhtiari at the University of Minnesota, is, originally from the University of Oklahoma, where they did a lot of research studying, how people's brains respond to cues and how you could use cognitive reappraisal, or how you can use sort of, brain electrical stimulation to decrease how somebody's brain responds. I think there's a lot of promise there, and so we're trying to find more people to work with on projects like this, because if nothing else, I think that this data shows that a lot of times patients don't have a lot of insight into their own cravings, and maybe this kind of data could help them sort of shift their thinking about it. So.
Yeah. And one of the most exciting things to me as a clinician is that you can actually track better if treatments are actually working for a person or not, and, improve our methods on the clinical side. So, the work that you're doing is incredibly valuable.
Thanks.
Well, we're definitely going to have you on again here in the future. I really want to hear about how the research goes, and also very curious to see how the conversations with the FDA go.
Yeah, absolutely.
Would love to hear about how it's being implemented in the clinics in the future. So Scott, Dr. Burwell, thanks so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. This has been such an honor to be on your show, Cody. Thank you very much.